Do you want to learn how to play City of Gears?
In this video, we're going to give you a concise explanation of the rules to this game, and if you stay tuned till the end, we'll give you some tips along the way, coming up. Hi, it's Tarrant.
And Stella from Meeple University. Our passion here is to explain board game rules clearly on YouTube. On our channel we do a lot of board game videos, including how to play, just like this one.
So if you're new here, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking on the bell to get notifications when we post new material. Now let's get into the rules. In City of Gears, players play the role of entrepreneurs attempting to expand their influence in the City of Gears. Players will gain gears which grant them extra powers, build gears into the city which serve as links that they can move across, and move their robots through the city, sometimes discovering new city tiles. Players can gain their victory points by utilising the various city tiles on the board or through area control, and at the end of the game each tile will score its points based on who has the combined most robots and gear links on that tile. The game will end shortly after all 9 of the city tiles have been revealed, and the player with the most points wins. In this video, we're showing you the Kickstarter Founders Edition of the game from its 2018 Kickstarter re-release. The game comes with a lot of flexibility in its setup. Firstly, take all of the city tiles, shuffle them up, and then deal 9 of them face down onto the table. Place a 2-point discovery token onto the back of each tile. Each player takes a player board and then sets it up in the following configurations for a 2-player game, a 4-player game, or a 3-player game. The 3-player setup is asymmetrical, and so one player will be further away from the other player's conflict, but also have a more difficult time spreading across the board. Each player takes all of the pieces in his or her colour, putting the converter gear into this slot, placing 3 robots lying down unbuilt and 3 robots standing up, built and ready to go, takes all of the ownership tokens, and takes 3 of his or her 4 dice. The 4th one is put off to the side for later in the game. Choose a first player, and then second player gets 1 victory point or prestige, third player gets a prestige and a movement token, and 4th player gets 2 prestige and a movement token. Any prestige gained in this manner can be placed face down, as all of the prestige tokens have the same back, and you can hide your victory points from opponents. Take 40 grey gears, setting aside any extras at random if you've got promos, and put them into the cloth bag. Set aside the white gears until later in the game. You're now ready to play. On each player's turn, he or she carries out all 4 of the steps shown on the reference on his or her player board before play passes to the next player. Players complete the 4 steps in the order that they're listed on the reference board. Produce resources, then activate city tiles, then perform actions, and then spoil overages. Within the perform actions phase, each of the actions available may be performed in any order, but perform actions must be done after step 2 and before step 4. Once the player has completed all 4 steps, play passes to the next player who does likewise, and so on around the table until the end of the game. The first step of each turn is to produce resources, and to do this the player rolls his or her 3 resource dice. For the rest of this turn, the symbols showing on these dice, as well as any resources that were collected and stored in previous rounds, and I'll talk about the restrictions on storage later, these are the resources which will be able to be spent on actions for this round. There is no difference between spending a resource token or spending a resource die matching the same token. But note that it is better to keep these separate as dice and tokens because there are other effects in the game which refer to dice specifically or to stored tokens specifically. Note that all dice, regardless of their colour, have the same distribution of symbols, and that this symbol refers to either a gear or a steam, not both. The second phase of each round is to activate city tiles, and in order to do this you have to have revealed some city tiles and moved your robots out onto them. You won't be doing this in the first round of the game, and so we'll come back and describe this later after we understand the actions that get you onto the map. The third phase in each round is to perform actions, and in this phase players will be spending their resources in order to take the actions shown here. This can be moving robots, drawing gears, the area control actions of destroying opponents' robots or gears, or constructing new robots. Players may move or overcharge as many times as they can afford in a given round, but may only draw gears or construct new workers once each per round. The first action I'll talk about is drawing gears, because you need to have done that before you can move. To draw gears, a player spends any number of gear tokens or symbols at once, and then draws that many gears from the bag. Players must choose the number of gears that they're going to draw before doing so. Then, regardless of the number of gears drawn, players may place at most 2 gears, one into the development row and one onto a linkage on the map. Any unplaced gears are returned to the bag. So, first let's look at placing gears onto the map. These are called gear links, and when a player places a gear link, he or she takes any gear, it doesn't matter what it says on the stickered side, and turns it to the unstickered side, then places it into a hole on the map, and places one of his or her ownership tokens onto it to indicate that it is his or her gear link. Gear links must be placed adjacent to the current location of one of his or her robots. So the first gear link that a player places must go into these slots that connect the player's factory to the board. Only once a player had moved a robot out to here would he or she be able to spread further around the board. Gear links may never be placed into an opponent's factory board regardless of bot placement, and may never be placed into the outer edge of the board. However, a player is allowed to lock down both of the connections between a pair of tiles. The second place a player can place a gear link is into the development row. When doing this, the player takes the gear and places it sticker side up into one of these 5 slots. If all of a player's slots are filled, then he or she must discard one gear before placing a new one. The discarded gear is removed from the game, not returned to the bag. Development gears give players actions which may be taken at most once per turn, and these actions may be taken at any time during a player's turn. So, for example, this development gear would allow the player to change one zap token into 2 gear tokens, or this one would allow the player simply to get a free gear token. To keep track of which gears you've used in each round, you can place your ownership tokens over those gears to make sure you don't use them a second time. You will clear all of these at the end of each round so that you can use them all again in the next round. Note that some of the development gears give an endgame victory point bonus rather than an ongoing effect. And each player begins the game with one common development gear called the converter, which allows that player to change any 2 resources, either dice or tokens, into one other resource. Once again, this can be used only once per turn. So, in summary, to take the draw gears action, which may be taken at most once per turn, the player spends any number of gear symbols, draws from the bag that number of gears, then may place at most one of them into a development slot, one of them onto a gear link spot, marking it with his or her ownership marker, and then returns any leftover gears into the bag. The next action I'm going to talk about is moving, and this is where you move your robots around the map. There are 3 ways to move in the game. You can spend a movement token to move one robot 1 space. You can spend a steam to move one robot 1 space. Or you can spend a zap to move one robot as many spaces as you'd like. Movement may only be to orthogonally adjacent spaces and only across your own coloured gear links. If your movement brings you into a city tile which is still face down, immediately take the discovery token, which is worth 2 victory points, and flip that city tile to the face up side. This tile is now ready to be used in the activate city tiles phase from the next turn onwards. The third type of action is overcharging, and this is how you directly attack your opponents in the game. Overcharging can be done using zap tokens and can target opponents' robots or gear links. Suppose at this time that it's Yellow's turn. To overcharge and destroy one of the red robots, Yellow would spend 1 zap token and then remove a robot from a space containing one of his or her own robots and return it to the player's player board. This robot is ready to come back out on subsequent turns. The second option is to spend 2 zap tokens in order to demolish a gear link which is adjacent to a tile where that player has a worker. The gear link is removed from the board and removed from the game, not returned to the bag, but the ownership token is returned to the player. The final option is to construct new robots, and the cost for this is in victory points. To build your first new robot, spend 2 victory points returning it to the main supply, and then take your robot and place it in this area ready to be moved from that point forward. Robots get more expensive as the game goes on, with your second one costing 4 and your third costing 6. So you should weigh up whether getting all of those robots is really going to generate more points than it cost. The final step on each player's turn is to spoil overages, and this is where players will store some of their resources and return others to the supply. You are limited in the resources that you can store in order to prevent a player from building up a huge supply and then having one giant turn towards the end of the game. The player may store as many movement tokens as he or she wishes, putting them in this slot, but may only store 1 steam, 1 cog, 1 zap, and then one of those 3 again. So in this spoil overages stage, the player could spend this die for a steam, could store 1 of these cogs, 1 of these zaps, and then 1 more token. Any leftover steam or cogs are discarded, and any leftover zaps are sold for 1 victory point apiece. Now we'll return to step 2 of your turn, which is to activate city tiles. On your turn, you can activate any city tiles where you have at least 1 robot, and where you can pay any applicable resource cost. On the bottom of each tile, you will see its effect when it's activated as a city tile. This robot icon indicates that you have to have your robot there to activate it, and any icons shown here are the resources that you would have to spend to activate the tile. The effect you get when activating the tile is printed in text at the bottom of the tile. This icon here, which is the number of victory points, does not apply to this phase of the game. This is points for control at the end of the game, and we'll come back to that later. So, when it comes to activating city tiles, a player may activate any or all tiles where he or she has robots and can pay the cost. Players may activate each tile only once per turn, regardless of the number of robots he or she has there. And players may activate the tiles in any order. After the player has finished activating city tiles, he or she may take linking bonuses for other tiles connected to the activated tiles. So let's look at this in detail. The linking bonus is the icon printed at the top of each of the city tiles. This will often be a victory point or a resource token. So after the player has activated any city tiles that he or she wishes, he or she gets the linking bonus for unactivated city tiles which are connected by 1 or more of that player's gear links to the tiles which were activated. Let's show an example. Suppose the player activated this tile and this tile. Then, after those activations are complete, the player will go through and look at any tiles that he or she can get to from those 2 tiles via these gear links. So the player could get here, 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 and here, but not to this space here. Then the player takes the linking bonus for each of those tiles. So a victory point for each of those, a movement token, and a cog. This tile here, which is not connected by the player's gear links, could not gain a linking bonus. And so if the player doesn't use the city activation for this, which he or she can do because the robot is there, then the player will get no benefit for this tile. Note that the linking bonuses come after all of the city tiles have been activated, and so resources that you gather during linking bonuses cannot then be spent to activate more city tiles. Once a player moves to and then flips over the 9th city tile, the countdown to the end of the game is triggered. Place the end of game board in plain sight for all players, and then take the gear bag and place the 4 white opening day gears into it, shuffling it up. From this moment forward until the end of the game, all players have 4 resource dice to play with instead of 3, and the player who triggered this countdown gets to roll that die and use it for the rest of this turn. The game will end once 3 of the 4 white gears have been drawn using the normal drawing gear actions. From this point forward, if a player draws gears from the bag and draws one of the white ones, it is placed in one of the slots on this board, and then the player draws another one from the bag to complete his or her move. The instant that a 3rd white gear is drawn, the game ends immediately, and the player who drew that gear does not get to complete the action in which that gear was drawn. Then proceed to final scoring. To calculate final scores, players first flip over any victory points they've been collecting through the game, by flipping over city tiles, by activating city tiles, or by cashing in zaps at the end of turns. Then, any player who's collected a development gear with an endgame effect takes that bonus now. Finally, look at each of the 9 city tiles and determine which player or players have control. Those players will gain the number of victory points shown in this cog on the bottom right of the tile. To determine control, each player adds up the total number of robots and gear links on each tile. The player with the most has control. In the event of a tie, the player with more gear links has control, and if still tied, then control is shared and both players get the full number of victory points. So looking at some examples, this tile, the yellow player, has 2 to 1 and has full control. On this tile, both players have 3, but the red player has more gear links and therefore has control. And yellow has no presence at all on this tile and it is therefore controlled by red. Victory points for control are added to the victory points gathered through the game, and the player with the highest score wins. If tied, the player who controls the most city tiles wins, and if still tied, victory is shared.
And that's how to play City of Gears. We hope that you enjoyed the video, and we hope that you enjoy playing the game.
If you'd like to see the game in action, you can check out our 1-round playthrough for this game by clicking on the link in the description.
If you like this video, please consider hitting the like button and share it with your friends so they can also see the rules. You don't have to explain the rules to them.
If you have any questions, comments, feedback, or want to share your experiences playing the game, please leave comments in the comment section below. We'd love to hear from you.
And if you like to join the community that loves board game just like you, we have a new Facebook page, Meeple University Community. I'll put the link to the descriptions below so you can check it out.
And finally, if you'd like to be among the first to know what's new from Meeple University, please consider subscribing to our channel by clicking on the Meeple up in the corner.
Until next time.